I tried to make a new friend every day for a month. You know how hard it is to make a real friend as an adult. Not just a coworker you nod at in the break room. Not just a gym buddy who disappears after 2 weeks. I mean an actual friend, someone who would help you move a couch, or at least pretend they're busy instead of ghosting you completely. I didn't, because I had 0 friends. That realization hit me one Friday night when I opened my contacts, scrolled for 5 minutes, and found exactly 2 people I could text. My mom. My dentist, who once texted me happy birthday. That was it. So, in a moment of pure delusion, I decided to do something insane. For 30 days, I would make a new friend every single day. Not just casual small talk, not just a hey, how's it going, to the barista, a real lasting friendship. Because I have the social instincts of a raccoon in a Walmart parking lot, I made a sign. A literal sign. It read, "Be my friend," in big, friendly letters. That's how, on day 1, I found myself standing in the middle of a crowded park, holding a sign like some kind of lonely protester. It did not go as planned. Day 1, immediate regret. 5 minutes. That's how long it took for me to start questioning every decision that led me here. The second I held up my sign, people stared. Some whispered. A couple of teenagers pointed at me while laughing. One guy actually took a picture, which I'm sure ended up in some group chat with the caption, "Look at this loser." I was seconds away from bolting when I heard, "Yo, what's your deal?" I turned and saw a guy about my age, sitting on a bench, eating a burrito the size of a newborn. He looked amused. "It's an experiment," I said. "I'm trying to make a new friend every day for a month." He raised an eyebrow. "That's either really sad or really cool." "Could be both." He thought about that, then he nodded. "Fair, all right, I'll bite. I'm Eric." Boom, friend 1 secured. Eric turned out to be surprisingly chill. We sat on the bench for a while, talking about the worst jobs we've ever had. His, selling knives door to door, mine, a coffee shop where the manager would sniff people to check if they were clean. He had strong opinions on sandwich cutting, diagonal, always, and gave me his number before leaving. "I'll answer, but if this turns into some weird cult thing, I'm out." Reasonable. Day 2, reality check. I thought day 1 was solid. I was wrong. Same park, same sign. Completely different reaction. One woman stopped just to ask, "Is this for TikTok?" A guy in a suit muttered, "I don't have any spare change." A teenager took one look at my sign and said, "Cringe," then just walked away. The worst part, no one stopped. I stood there for an hour, like an idiot, before finally giving up. This was going to be harder than I thought. Day 3, public humiliation. I realized something. People don't trust a guy with a sign. So I tried a new strategy. Instead of holding it up, I just set it on my table at an outdoor cafe and pretended to be a normal person. It was working. People weren't staring as much. I even got a few smiles. And then, "Hey everyone, this guy needs a friend." I looked up. A street magician was pointing at me, loudly. Oh no. Within seconds, I was surrounded by a full crowd. "Who wants to be his friend?" the magician shouted. The silence was deafening. I wanted to melt into the pavement. And finally, a woman raised her hand. "I'll do it." Magician clapped. "Amazing, what's your name?" "Sarah," she said, "and this dude looks like he's suffering, so I feel bad." Accurate. The crowd dispersed and Sarah sat down. That was brutal. "Yeah, but kind of funny." "Yeah." We got coffee out of mutual embarrassment, and it turned out Sarah was actually awesome. She worked at a bookstore, had a dog named Pickles, and was deeply invested in ranking every flavor of Pop-Tarts. "Brown sugar cinnamon is the best," she declared. "Objectively false," I said. "It's obviously strawberry." She narrowed her eyes. This friendship might not last. But she texted me the next day. Day 4, the conspiracy theorist. After yesterday's disaster, I wanted a low-key day. No crowds, no magicians, no public humiliation. So I picked a quiet coffee shop and just set the sign on my table. Low effort, low risk. It worked for a while. Then a man in his 50s with a wild gray beard and a trench coat sat down across from me. No introduction, no questions. Just plopped down like this was a normal thing to do. He tapped the sign. "What's the catch?" "No catch," I said. "Just trying to make a new friend." He narrowed his eyes. That's exactly what they'd say. "Who?" "Them." "Oh no." His name was Greg, allegedly, and within 5 minutes I had learned. Birds aren't real. The government uses fluoride to keep people docile. Moon landing was faked, but also the moon is hollow and houses a secret base. I nodded a lot, said things like, "Huh, interesting," while trying to calculate how fast I could escape. And Greg leaned in and whispered, "Want to see something wild?" No, I did not. But I panicked and said, "Sure." He pulled out his phone and showed me a blurry photo of a pigeon. "See," he said. "See what?" He sighed, "that it's a drone." I had no idea how to respond. Greg and I technically exchanged numbers, but when I texted him later just to see if he'd answer, I got one message back. "They know." Safe to say, Greg was not friend 4. Day 5, failure. I don't know if it was the Greg incident or just the exhaustion of standing around like a lonely scarecrow, but day 5 sucked. I picked a new location, outside a library. Smart people go to libraries. Maybe smart people would be less weird than Greg. They were not. I stood there for 2 hours. Not a single person stopped. A guy on a bike yelled, "Get a job." A woman in yoga pants shook her head and muttered, "Men." At one point, a pigeon landed near me, and for a brief moment, I wondered if Greg was right. By the time I left, I was frustrated. Was this whole experiment just doomed to fail? Day 6, a win finally. After yesterday's soul-crushing failure, I almost didn't go out. But I did, and thank God, because that's how I met Mia. Mia didn't hesitate. She just walked right up, pointed at my sign, and said, "Okay, sure, let's be friends." Just like that. No suspicion, no questions, no weird energy. We got coffee, and I found out she was a teacher, into rock climbing, and had a weirdly extensive knowledge of obscure 90s cartoons. She also didn't find it strange that I was doing this. "You know," she said, stirring her latte, "more people should do this." That was the first time I thought, maybe I'm not crazy. Maybe this could actually work. Day 8, the casual talker. I was getting used to the idea that this wouldn't be as easy as it sounded. I wasn't about to start making lifelong friendships every single day, but I figured I could at least meet one cool person. I decided to try something a bit different and went to a local brewery. I thought, people at breweries are usually chill, right? Wrong. The place was packed. People were more interested in their own conversations than my desperate attempts to make new friends. I stood by the bar for a while, feeling out of place. Everyone around me seemed so normal. They were laughing, talking about work, about their vacations. And there I was, holding a sign that made me look like I had been kicked out of a dating reality show. Just when I was about to give up, a guy walked up to me. He was in his mid-30s, wearing a plaid shirt and a beard that screamed, "I brew my own beer." "Hey, is that a sign?" he asked. "What's going on here?" "Yeah," I said. "It's an experiment trying to make new friends, you in." He paused, then grinned. "All right, I'm Sam. I've got 10 minutes before I have to go rescue my dog from my neighbor. But hey, if you're in the market for beer recommendations." That was the start of a very one-sided conversation. Sam told me everything about his life, his dog, his brewing process, and how he once made a batch of beer that tasted like liquid gold. By the end of it, I got his number and a vague promise to talk more about beer sometime. Was Sam a true friend? No, but he was a friendly face, and that felt like a win for me. Day 10, complete fail again. You know what's harder than making friends? Finding people who actually want to be your friend. That's what I learned on day 10. I tried a dog park, thinking that dogs were the perfect icebreaker. Surely, anyone with a dog would be friendly, right? Wrong. Dogs were great, people, not so much. I stood there with my sign, trying to look approachable, but instead I looked like a creepy dude at a petting zoo. One woman gave me a strange look, then walked away quickly. A guy with a pit bull seemed vaguely alarmed and muttered something about people with weird hobbies. Even the dogs seemed to have more friends than I did. By the time I left, I felt like I might need to rethink my strategy. Day 12, the unexpected kindness. I wasn't ready to give up, but I was starting to feel the fatigue. But then something surprising happened. I ran into Charlie. Charlie was the bartender at a dive bar I used to go to. I wasn't exactly a regular, but he recognized me after I'd been there a few times. "You're that guy from the park, right?" he asked, pointing at my sign. I nodded. "Yup, trying to make new friends." He laughed, shaking his head. "Okay, man, let's do this. What's up?" And just like that, Charlie joined the club. He ended up talking about the best dive bars in the city, his weird obsession with conspiracy documentaries, and how he swears the city's traffic lights were designed by aliens. Charlie might not have been my new best friend by the end of the conversation, but he sure was one of the most interesting people I'd met in a while. And unlike Greg, he didn't think the pigeons were drones. Small victories. Day 14, a mixed bag. It was time to switch things up. I wanted to get away from the same locations. The parks, the coffee shops, the bars, they were all feeling too familiar. So I decided to try something unexpected, a local bookstore. The place smelled like old books and coffee, and I figured I'd find someone who appreciated literature as much as I did. Turns out, bookstores are the worst place for an introvert to try to make friends. People were focused, nose deep in books, and every time I approached someone, I felt like I was interrupting a sacred ritual. I did get a brief interaction with a woman in the science fiction section. She glanced at my sign, smiled, then went right back to her book. She told me, "Sorry, I'm just in the middle of a chapter about time travel." I took it as a semi-success, though. It wasn't rejection, just an enthusiastic maybe later. Day 16, the unexpected hit. On day 16, I decided to return to the park, but with a twist. Instead of standing in one spot, I'd just walk around. I figured the less desperate I looked, the better. It didn't take long before a young woman approached me. She was in her mid-20s, wearing a green sweater and carrying a book in her hand. "I saw your sign and thought, why not?" she said. Her name was Lily, and she turned out to be one of the most genuine, normal people I'd met. We got coffee and talked about everything: her recent move to the city, her work at a nonprofit, and her weird obsession with plant-based ice cream. Lily seemed genuinely interested in the experiment. She said she had once tried to make friends every day at a summer camp, and it worked, until she got kicked out for being too friendly. After that conversation, I realized that sometimes the best friendships start with a little bit of randomness and weirdness. And maybe, just maybe, this whole experiment was worth it. Day 18, the unlikely friend, a literal superhero. I wasn't expecting much today. I went to a neighborhood street fair, thinking I might find someone who wasn't preoccupied with the usual carnival activities. But, as per usual, the day started with rejection. I was getting a lot of side eyes as I strolled with my sign, but the weird thing was that no one said anything. It felt like the awkwardness was building up. I was beginning to get really tired of this, but then, out of nowhere, I was interrupted by a guy in a full superhero costume. Yes, you read that right. He was wearing a bright blue cape, a red spandex suit, and had a giant letters on his chest. But this wasn't just some random dude messing around. This guy had some sort of serious energy. He marched up to me and said, "I saw your sign. Are you ready to be saved?" At first, I thought it was a prank, but he wasn't joking. "I'm Captain Resolve," he announced proudly. "I fight apathy, I save people from loneliness." I had to hold back a laugh. "Oh, you're serious?" "Of course I am. Let me join your experiment," he said, striking a pose that made me wonder if this was some sort of secret society. He ended up talking for almost 2 hours about his hero's journey. It was mostly him giving motivational speeches to strangers, and his self-appointed role in fighting apathy one person at a time. Before leaving, he handed me a card with his superhero name and an invitation to his Save the World event next weekend. Was he my friend? Technically, yes. Was he a little odd? Definitely. But hey, Captain Resolve was a real friend, and I'd take that. Day 20, the underground artist. By day 20, I was feeling like this experiment was almost doomed. The social fatigue was starting to settle in. It felt like everyone was either too busy, too suspicious, or too weird. But then, as if the universe was throwing me a bone, I met Jenna. Jenna was an underground artist who was painting a mural on the side of an abandoned building. She was on a ladder, splashing vivid colors across a large canvas. I approached her cautiously, holding up my sign. "Hey, I'm trying to make friends. Want to join the experiment?" She gave me a curious look and said, "This is a strange way to approach people. But sure, I'll be your friend. You're the first person who's asked to hang out in person in weeks." I wasn't quite sure what to make of that, but I ended up hanging out with her for a couple of hours. We talked about her work and how she'd started painting to cope with personal struggles. She explained that her murals were a way of expressing the hidden beauty of the city, and how she often painted in places that were off the beaten path, hoping to surprise people who might come across them. Jenna was refreshing. She wasn't bogged down by societal expectations, and I admired that. We even made a plan to grab coffee next time, and she promised to show me a secret art gallery she was involved with. It was one of the coolest moments of the experiment, and certainly one of the most unexpected friendships I'd made. Day 22, the magician. I thought I'd already met the weirdest person during this whole experiment, but nope, the next person who approached me took it to another level. I was sitting on a bench, just observing people as they passed by. At this point, I was feeling like I had exhausted every possible interaction, when a man in his 50s walked up. He had a mysterious air about him, wearing an old-fashioned suit and carrying a briefcase. "Is this the place for, magic?" he asked in a quiet voice, glancing around like he was checking for spies. I blinked. "Magic like Harry Potter magic." No, real magic," he said, with an intensity that made my eyebrows shoot up. "I'm a magician, you see. I perform for private events." At this point, I couldn't help but be intrigued. "I'm also a mind reader," he continued. "I can tell if you're telling the truth. I can tell if you're hiding something." I wasn't sure if he was kidding, but I was not in the mood to challenge him. "So, do you want to be friends?" I asked, half skeptical. Without missing a beat, he reached into his briefcase, pulled out a deck of cards, and said, "I'll tell you if you're lying to me about that question. Pick a card." I picked a card, and we spent the next 20 minutes having what could only be described as an odd, magical conversation. He read my mind, or so he claimed, and I humored him. In return, I told him about my experiment and why I was doing it. Before he left, he handed me a small token, a golden coin that he claimed had mystical powers. I'm still not sure if he was serious. He said, "Take it, and whenever you feel lonely, it will remind you of this moment. And remember, magic is everywhere." I left that interaction with the distinct feeling that I had just made friends with a guy who lived in his own world. But hey, it was an experience, and maybe he wasn't so crazy after all. Day 24, unexpected connection. At this point, I'd become so used to meeting people with weird quirks that, when Maria walked up to me, she didn't seem so strange. She was a photographer who had been traveling the world, capturing candid moments of people in their everyday lives. We talked for about an hour about her adventures and what it was like to interact with strangers through the lens of a camera. Maria told me she often felt more connected to people than most because she saw their true selves through her photos. She asked me, "Do you ever wonder if we truly see each other, or if we're just looking past one another all the time?" It was one of those deep conversations where I felt like I was connecting with someone on a real level, something I didn't expect to happen during this experiment. We made plans to meet up again, this time for a photo walk, and honestly, that felt like one of the most genuine friendships I had made. Day 26, the failed reunion. After all the success, I was starting to feel like I might actually complete this experiment with something that resembled success. But then came the reunion with Eric, the guy from day one. We texted a few times after our first meeting, but when we actually met up, it was awkward. We tried to rekindle the chemistry we had, but it just didn't work. The conversation felt forced, and the humor wasn't clicking. It was like we had both changed in a way that made the connection fade. By the end of our coffee, we both agreed that maybe we were just one-time friends, and that was okay. It wasn't a failure, but it was a reminder that not every friendship lasts, and that's perfectly fine. Day 28, the surprise visit. I was feeling a strange sense of accomplishment. I had survived almost a month of asking strangers to be my friend, and some of these interactions had turned into actual, meaningful connections. But just as I was starting to feel comfortable with the whole situation, I got a surprise visit. I was sitting in a coffee shop trying to catch up on my work when the door swung open, and there, standing in the doorway with a giant smile, was Ben from day 2, the guy who ran the Neopets server. I hadn't heard from him since our initial meeting, so I didn't know what to expect. But there he was, wearing the same bright pink hoodie, practically bursting with energy. "Dude," he said, waving like we were long-lost friends. "I saw you were still doing this whole experiment and I had to come check in. How's it going? Still asking strangers to be your BFF?" It felt a little surreal. Ben didn't just drop in. He made a conscious effort to come and see how I was doing. We ended up talking for over an hour, and surprisingly, it didn't feel forced. He told me about his experiences running his Neopets server and how he had started a side project to teach people how to trade digital goods in a more ethical way. He didn't talk about Neopets for long, though. I swear he picked up on how disinterested I was in online pet economics and switched to discussing anime. Before he left, he handed me a handwritten list of recommendations for weird and obscure internet communities to join. I didn't think I'd ever use it, but it felt nice to know he was actually paying attention. It was a simple encounter, but for some reason, it reaffirmed my belief that this experiment wasn't just about finding random friends. It was about meeting people who were willing to stick around, even if they were weird or not exactly what I expected. Day 29, the college student who changed everything. I felt like I had enough social interactions to fill up a self-help book. So when I met Maya, a college student with a thick accent and a very serious vibe, I figured it would just be another typical encounter. I was walking around a university campus when I spotted her sitting alone on a bench, studying with her headphones on. Normally, I would have just passed by, but I felt like I had to do it. I had to make my move. So I walked up, stood in front of her, and held up my sign. Without even looking up, she said, "You're the guy with the sign, right? I've heard about you." "What?" I said, startled. "You've heard about me?" "Yeah," she shrugged. "You're all over my feed, it's pretty funny." She took out her headphones and introduced herself. Maya was a PhD student studying psychology, and she had seen people posting about me on various university pages. She was curious but a bit skeptical about the whole concept, so we agreed to chat. What followed wasn't just some surface-level conversation. Maya gave me an unexpected insight into what I was doing. We ended up talking for almost 2 hours, and it wasn't just about small talk. She got me to think about my experiment from a psychological perspective, pointing out how human connections could often feel forced in a world obsessed with instant gratification and superficial interactions. She didn't say it outright, but I think she was subtly calling out the shallow nature of my approach. I'll admit, it made me a little uncomfortable, but it also made me realize that I might not have been going about this the right way. She talked about the need for deeper connections, the kind that take time and effort, rather than just showing up with a sign every day. At the end of the conversation, she left me with a parting thought. Sometimes the real connections are the ones you don't force. I didn't get her number or anything, but her words stuck with me for the rest of the day. Maybe I had been going about this all wrong. Day 30, the final push. I had made it to the last day, and I'll be honest, I was exhausted. But there was a part of me that still wanted to finish strong, to see if I could end this experiment on a high note, something memorable. I went to the local library, figuring it would be a calm and quiet place. I wasn't expecting anything huge, just a couple of polite interactions. But as I walked around with my sign, I realized something that I hadn't really noticed before. I wasn't just doing this for the sake of meeting people anymore. I had started to enjoy these random interactions. The awkwardness didn't bother me as much anymore, and the strange conversations had become intriguing rather than uncomfortable. That's when I met Sarah, a young woman sitting at a table by the window, reading a thick novel. She didn't immediately look up when I approached, so I asked, "Would you like to be my friend for today?" She glanced up, raised an eyebrow, and said, "Seriously?" "Yep," I said, smiling. "It's my thing." She put the book down and nodded. "All right, I'm in. What's the deal?" We ended up talking about books, movies, and philosophy. It was probably the deepest conversation I'd had in a long time, and it felt easy, like we'd known each other for years. When it was time to leave, she gave me a book recommendation and a hug, which I didn't see coming. This last interaction was the kind of unpredictable, genuine connection I had hoped for at the beginning of this experiment. And it made me realize that, in the end, friendship is unpredictable, and sometimes the most important connections happen when you stop forcing them. Day 31, the final reflection. Last day of the experiment. It had been a month. 30 days of awkward interactions, unexpected friendships, failed attempts, and surprising moments of connection. I'd set out to meet one new person every day, but what I hadn't anticipated was how much this experiment would challenge my own perceptions of friendship, loneliness, and human connection. At the end of this journey, I can honestly say it wasn't the number of friends I made that mattered the most. It was the lessons I learned along the way. Lesson 1, it's not about the number. When I started this experiment, I thought I'd count how many people I could meet, how many new friends I could have in my contacts by the end of the month. I wanted to prove something, to myself, to others, that I could make friends at will. What I learned is that it's not about the quantity of people you know, but the quality of those connections. Some days I'd meet people who seemed genuinely interested, and other days, I'd find myself in an awkward conversation that just didn't click. But even the failed connections taught me something valuable about social dynamics and how easily you can fall into the trap of superficial interactions. Lesson 2, people are strange but in a good way. When I first started, I thought people would be much colder, much less receptive to this weird little experiment. But the more I put myself out there, the more I realized people are way stranger than you expect, and that's actually a good thing. Some of the best moments came from people who were totally unexpected. The Neopets guy, the psychology student, the street magician who literally forced me into a friendship. Every single one of them had something weird about them, something different, and I found that those moments of uniqueness are what make real friendships stand out. You don't need to be normal to be someone's friend, you just need to be genuine. Lesson 3, vulnerability is key. One thing I didn't anticipate was how vulnerable I would feel throughout this process. The idea of standing out in public with a sign, asking strangers to be my friend, felt ridiculous at first. It was uncomfortable. But the more I did it, the more I started to realize something. Being vulnerable is the first step to building meaningful connections. For example, when I met Maya, the psychology PhD student, she pointed out that I was trying to force friendships. And that's when I realized, maybe this wasn't just about randomly meeting people, but about opening up to the possibility of deeper connections. Sometimes, you have to be vulnerable to find authentic relationships. And that's the hardest but most rewarding part of being human. Lesson 4, friendship takes time. Maya's point about forcing friendships stuck with me. It's easy to want quick results, especially when you're doing something like this experiment. But real friendships don't happen in a day or even a week. They take time to develop, and they require mutual effort. Even though I met a lot of people over the course of the month, I didn't walk away with 30 new best friends. Some people I met were nice, but we never kept in touch. Others, like Sarah from the library, turned out to be people I'd love to stay in contact with. But in the end, the true measure of a friendship is not how quickly it happens, but how authentic it is when it does. Day 31, what now? So what happens next? I've completed the experiment, but I don't think I'll stop trying to make new friends. It's not about holding up a sign or being a weird guy in public anymore. It's about maintaining an open attitude toward new people and experiences. Maybe I won't approach people with a sign again, but I will keep asking questions, staying curious, and embracing vulnerability. After all, human connection isn't about a single moment. It's about continuing to put yourself out there, even when it's uncomfortable, and trusting that sometimes the right people will walk into your life when you least expect it. In the end, I didn't just make friends, I learned how to be a friend. This experiment might have been a little out there, but I can honestly say it was one of the most life-changing experiences I've ever had. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And sometimes that's enough.